It's Local Edition. Brad Pomerance here in Sacramento, our Capitol Bureau. We are joined by Fran Pavley, member of the California State Senate. It makes sense, but I thank you for enlightening me on this issue, which is the connection between water and energy. Enlighten us. What's the connection?
It's really quite amazing,
Right.
because most people are surprised to hear that nearly 20% of all the energy we use in the state of California is moving, treating, and heating water. Amazing.
And you have to really dig deep to realize, of course, because like you said, we have to move it into either groundwater aquifers or above ground storage. And then when you do that, you then need to move it out if you want to use it. And like you said, it needs to be treated. And that's
Coming and going.
coming and going. And then to get it to the user, be it ag or residential commercial.
That's right. And heat it. That's
Right.
energy intensive as well. And don't forget, when we import water to Southern California over 300 miles up and over the Tehachapis, very energy intensive.
And then when we think about the need, the laudable need to diversify our water portfolio, a lot of the ways we do that are through methods that are energy intensive. Desalination.
Absolutely.
A great part of an expanded portfolio, but very energy intensive. Recycling.
Yes, recycling. You know, we're going to all have to, in the future, use water not just once, but maybe 2 or 3 times. But that means you treat it to reuse it. And yes, energy intensive. You're taking it from where it's used, taking it back to a plant, recycling it, send it back out again, maybe for landscaping purposes.
So do we need, I mean, look, we're so focused on the drought. And so to throw in this monkey wrench of energy use, important, but are you able to get your friends and colleagues to focus on it?
I think what they're realizing that there's a potential for a win here.
Tell us.
So, of course, I may be biased because
okay.
I chair the Water Committee, and
It's all
climate
good.
change and energy
It's all
are
good.
my passions and priorities. But it really works incredibly well together. So we're in a drought.
Right.
We're never going to be able to rely on the future of our snowpack. It's going to be volatile from year to year. We're going to have to rely on more locally sustainable water solutions. Yes, we're always going to, in Southern California, have to import water to some extent, but we can reduce that. And when we're reducing importing of water, we're reducing our energy use.
Right.
But what I also like to see, if we're putting in recycling facilities or a desal plant, we should be putting in renewable energy to run those places. There's no reason, if you're at the base of the Tehachapi Mountains and you're getting ready to pump water up in aqueducts, and I've talked to the head of the Department of Water Resources, you're out in hot areas that are flat, why not have an array of solar panels?
It's funny you mentioned that. I've done some research on desal, and in Saudi Arabia, they're looking to build a desal plant that would run exclusively on solar. And then you probably are aware that in San Luis Obispo, there's the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant.
Right.
Now, controversies aside, nuclear is green. You're not
Greener in some ways.
in some ways,
yes,
but work
yes.
work with me.
Yes,
And,
I'll go with that.
Exactly, and they're looking. Well, Diablo uses desal internally, and they're not using outside energy. They're using their own nuclear energy, and they're going to expand desal for surrounding communities. Again, greener, arguably, than other energy sources.
Well, here's our other thing.
Please.
SB 350 was passed last year and signed by the governor, and part of that requirement is to reduce our energy consumption by 50% by 2030.
Right.
Now, you can do that in existing buildings, but if you knew that 20% of all the energy we use is moving and treating water, wouldn't that have to be part of the solution? And I say, yes. Yes, it should.
So what are you looking to do? I know you have a bill percolating, if I can use that cliche, SB 1425, that's looking at the question of greenhouse gas emissions in connection with water. Is that part of a solution, the solution?
It's part of the solution. You have 2 things that need to be done. One, put in renewables to power energy, whether it's
solar, wind,
going up and
right.
over the Tehachapi's,
Right.
or whether it's recycled water or desal. So that should be part of it, not just using traditional energy sources like natural gas or something like that. And so the other thing we're going to have to do is be able to measure the carbon embeddedness in water. Now, people are working on all these protocols. How do you measure? How do you quantify? If you reduce the import of water by 20%, how do you quantify the reductions in carbon? Part of AB 32 and maybe SB 32 is looking at quantifying the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. How do you quantify that? So there hasn't been the methodology in place that everyone has agreed on, and water agencies would like to have a standard that
Right.
establish a baseline, because there could be incentives, if you will, for local governments or water agencies to not only reduce their water consumption by imposing water conservation measures or reducing importing water, but they at the same time could reduce the bills on their water by reducing energy. Energy is a very expensive part of their water delivery on the consumer's bills.
Could the water districts or purveyors be part of the cap and trade scheme?
Well, that's exactly where I was sort
Right,
of heading.
okay, please.
And I didn't know.
No, go there.
So to obtain allowances, that would be monies from the sale of allowances
Right.
for cap and trade. You have to have what we call a nexus. You have to be able to show that you are reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You have to
Okay.
be able to quantify it.
Right.
And if you can show that you're reducing greenhouse gas emissions through energy efficiency or
Right.
whatever the renewables, other strategies
can
in
trade.
place, you can not only trade, but you can perhaps obtain funding for some of those investment strategies to
The
reduce
renewables.
your energy consumption. No, even water agencies or local governments, if they're reducing water consumption, well, then they're also reducing energy consumption.
Right.
We need to be able to quantify that reduction. There are groups out there like the Climate Registry who back in 2000,
Right.
they actually came in and did a voluntary reporting of greenhouse gas emissions for stationary sources, for major businesses, major polluters or users of energy. It was voluntary reporting. Businesses did that. They had no problem with meeting the protocols. They were smart because when AB 32 passed, they got credit for early action, right? We like to reward good
Right, of
behavior
course.
in this business.
Of course.
And so we're trying to do the same thing with water. So hopefully working with the State Water Board, maybe with the Energy Commission, this is establishing a voluntary reporting and put protocols in place to measure the carbon embeddedness in water, sort of to tie in, if you will, in a very clear nexus, water
Right.
and energy.
So is the science there yet?
It pretty much is. It's just done differently. So we want a standard that works for everyone. LA County Public Works is very engaged in
Right.
this. People involved in stormwater capture and reuse
that's a
are
big
trying
issue.
to do this too, because they know if they can do this right and you could quantify it correctly and accurately to a standard that everyone agrees on, that could open up for accessing some of that cap and trade revenue.
I want to shift gears very briefly and to talk about Porter Ranch in your district. How are your constituents doing? It was a rough early 2016.
Really rough, really rough. And in fact, as of 2 weeks ago, there were still 3,000 families that hadn't returned home. It's getting close to the end of the school year, so those students who have been out of their school, their neighborhood school, for 5 months, they'll at least be able to finish the year there and then come back. Some of these houses are still being cleaned
Right.
of residue and things. But here's what we learned from Porter Ranch. It's sort of back to
Right.
the
Right.
water energy issue. We've become so reliant on natural gas that if anything happened to that large reservoir that holds 85 billion cubic feet, the largest one in the western United States, we won't have enough energy to power our 17 power plants in Southern California.
You'll come back to talk more about it?
I will.
Her name is Fran Pavley. My name is Brad Pomerance. It's Local Edition.